the control we have today over the engine and the transmission equals the control electric cars have over their electrical motors. Our software engineers have been tweaking and adjusting the Lightspeed transmission software and also introduced a torque control system in the car that reduces the need for traction control intervention.
For years, the Bugatti Chiron Super Sport looked untouchable. More horsepower, all-wheel drive, a legendary W16 engine, and the only production car to officially break the 300-mile-per-hour barrier.
We need to slow down. This is a car that can go over 300 miles per hour. Bugatti plans to sell the lightning-fast speedster.
On paper, this wasn't a contest. Then Koenigsegg, a small family-run manufacturer from Sweden, building a few dozen cars a year, arrived. Fewer horsepower, two-driven wheels, a different philosophy, and changed everything. Was Bugatti's dominance built on the wrong assumptions? How did the Koenigsegg Jesko Absolut turn defeat into victory as the race went on? Let's break down every run, every number, and the surprising truth behind one of the greatest hypercar battles ever recorded. The spec sheet that promised a Bugatti victory. On paper, this was not supposed to be close. The Bugatti Chiron Super Sport carries an 8-liter, quad-turbocharged W16 engine, producing 1,578 horsepower.
The Bugatti Chiron Super Sport has an 8-litre quad-turbo W16 with 1,600 horsepower,
sent to all four wheels through a 7-speed dual-clutch transmission. That all-wheel drive system is not a footnote. It is the entire foundation of Bugatti's philosophy, a way of turning raw output into usable, repeatable traction, rather than wasted wheel spin. The Chiron Super Sport descends directly from the original Veyron, the car that first broke the 250-mile-per-hour barrier.
Fastest production car in the world, up to its top speed.
That top speed is 253 miles per hour.
And redefined what a production hypercar could be. Only 30 examples of the Super Sport 300-plus variant were ever built, each one starting near $3.9 million, before secondary market prices climbed toward 6 or 7 million euros. Scarcity like that turns a car into a monument before it ever turns a wheel in anger. The Koenigsegg Jesko Absolut tells a different design story entirely. It runs a 5-liter twin-turbocharged V8 with a flat-plane crank.
Especially compared to four-wheel drive hybrid cars with directly responding electrical motors, we have a twin-turbo V8 combustion engine,
producing 1,280 horsepower on E85 fuel, routed only to the rear wheels through a 9-speed Lightspeed transmission, built to shift faster than any conventional gearbox on the road, priced closer to $3.4 million. Fewer cylinders, less power, half the drive wheels and a lower price tag. Does that sound like a car built to beat a Bugatti in a straight fight? Weight told a different part of the story before either engine ever fired. The Chiron Super Sport tips the scale at nearly 4,400 pounds, a machine built like a bank vault with a rocket bolted inside. The Jesko Absolut weighs barely 3,060 pounds, over 1,300 pounds lighter, built from carbon fiber with almost nothing left to trim, its rear wing deleted entirely in favor of smaller stabilizing fins. Run the numbers all the way through, and something strange appears. Divide horsepower by weight, and the lighter Koenigsegg actually posts a higher power-to-weight ratio than the heavier Bugatti, despite giving up nearly 300 horsepower on the spec sheet.
and we even beat those in half-mile and quarter-mile top speed. And the quarter-mile was for the first time ever in production car history over 300 kilometers per hour.
That single ratio was hiding in plain sight the entire time, and almost nobody talked about it before the race. Why would anyone bet against 1,300 pounds of raw advantage plus a better power-to-weight number? Because horsepower has a way of silencing arithmetic, and for years, it did exactly that. Bugatti's own record stood untouched. In August of 2019, a Chiron Super Sport 300 Plus prototype, driven by racing driver Andy Wallace, achieved a two-way average of 304.773 miles per hour.
To get everything worked together in one moment and to head for the 300-mile boundary, it was like heading for the pinnacle of automobile competition.
Becoming the first production car in history to cross the 300-mile-per-hour barrier. That record did not appear out of nowhere. 2 years earlier, in 2017, it had been Koenigsegg holding the outright speed crown, when the Agera RS reached 277 miles per hour on a closed stretch of Nevada highway. A record Bugatti spent 2 years and untold engineering hours specifically chasing down and beating. No Koenigsegg, no Hennessy, no rival manufacturer has matched Bugatti's number since, under the same verified, two-way conditions. That record is not a marketing copy. It is engraved into Guinness World Records, permanent and undisputed, the kind of number that ends arguments before they start. So when the two cars finally rolled onto the same tarmac for a real head-to-head, the assumption sitting in every comment section was simple and unshaken. Bugatti had already won this fight 7 years earlier, and nothing happening on test day was going to rewrite history already written in ink. The two companies behind these machines could not be built more differently. Bugatti now operates under Bugatti Rimac, a joint venture backed by deep automotive engineering resources and decades of institutional racing knowledge stretching back to the original Molsheim factory. Koenigsegg remains a small, independent, family-run manufacturer based in Ängelholm, Sweden, building a few dozen cars a year with a fraction of Bugatti's workforce and budget. On paper, that imbalance in resources should widen the gap even further in Bugatti's favor. Bigger budgets typically mean more wind tunnel hours, more prototype iterations, and more room for error along the way. Yet Koenigsegg has spent 2 decades punching above its size, specifically in the categories that reward obsessive weight reduction and aerodynamic efficiency over sheer manufacturing scale. And that history of independent, stubborn engineering was about to matter far more than anyone expected once the cars actually started moving. Bugatti strikes first. The first runs seem to confirm every one of those assumptions, run after run. In the standing quarter mile, 440 yards of pure launch, grip, and nerve.
Here we have rear-wheel drive, a combustion engine to make the car agile and lightweight. And still we beat everyone else in the quarter mile, anyone else apart from four-wheel drive, 4 electrical motor, electric cars.
The Chiron Super Sport crossed the line in 9.6 seconds. Its all-wheel drive system converting every ounce of horsepower into forward motion without a hint of hesitation. The Jesko Absolut, fighting rear-wheel drive wheel spin and reportedly launching in the wrong gear off the line, crossed in 9.9 seconds. 0.3 of a second does not sound like much until it is remembered that these are 7-figure machines built to shave milliseconds, not fractions of a full second, out of every single run. In a straight fight over a quarter mile, weight distribution and drivetrain layout mattered more than outright power. And the heavier all-wheel drive Bugatti simply put its horsepower down more efficiently than the lighter rear-wheel drive Koenigsegg could manage in those first critical moments off the line. A car cannot use horsepower. It cannot put to the ground. And for 440 yards, Bugatti's 4 driven wheels beat Koenigsegg's 2 every single time. The rolling races told an almost identical story. Starting from a moving pace rather than a dead stop, the Chiron Super Sport won 2 of the head-to-head runs outright, again leaning on the traction advantage baked directly into its all-wheel drive architecture. A system that does not care whether the car is launching from zero or already moving at speed, because 4 driven wheels remain 4 driven wheels regardless of starting condition. Is there a more Bugatti way to win than brute, controlled dominance delivered the same way every single time? For a brand built on the idea that engineering discipline beats everything else on the road, this looked like total validation of every design choice made across 2 decades of development. Factory test drivers from both manufacturers were present specifically to remove human error from the equation, meaning these were not amateur runs staged for a promotional stunt. They were as close to a clean, repeatable scientific comparison as 2 7-figure hypercars can get on public tarmac, with technicians from Molsheim and Engelholm both watching the same timing lights. And every number from those first exchanges pointed toward a single, unavoidable conclusion. The Chiron Super Sport was not just competitive with the Jesko Absolut in these early stages. It was systematically beating it, run after run, exactly the way the spec sheet had promised, back when this was still nothing more than a theoretical matchup argued about online for years. For a moment, watching those first 2 runs unfold, it looked like the entire showdown might end exactly where everyone already expected it to. Launch control technology explains part of the gap. Bugatti's dual-clutch system distributes torque across 4 contact patches almost instantly.
2 transmissions built into one. They call it a double clutch transmission.
Meaning, wheel slip is measured in fractions of a degree rather than full rotations, and the driver's only real job is holding the throttle flat while the electronics manage the rest. Koenigsegg's 9-speed transmission, engineered to skip directly between gears rather than shifting sequentially through each one, is a marvel of mechanical ambition. But a marvel still asks more of both car and driver during the most violent half-second of any run: the initial bite of tire against tarmac. A wrong gear launch in a conventional gearbox costs a fraction of a second. In a car built to leap between ratios instantly, a single mistimed selection can cost considerably more. And on a strip where 0.3 of a second separates victory from defeat, that margin is not something either factory driver could simply shrug off. None of that changes the final numbers from those opening runs. It only explains why they landed the way they did, and why nobody watching those first 2 exchanges had any reason yet to doubt where the day was heading. When physics took control, then the distance grew, and something buried inside the data started to shift. Racing folklore has always insisted that lightweight, aerodynamically obsessive machines only reveal their true nature once speed climbs past the range where launch technique and traction matter most. And folklore, it turns out, is sometimes just physics waiting patiently for the right stage. The Jesko Absolut carries a drag coefficient of 0.278, one of the lowest ever recorded on a production car, compared to the Chiron Super Sport's 0.36. That gap barely registers at low speed, when momentum and grip dominate every calculation a driver makes. Past 200 kilometers per hour, it becomes the entire story, because aerodynamic drag does not scale in a straight line with velocity. It scales with the square of it, meaning every additional mile per hour costs exponentially more energy to overcome than the mile per hour before it. As both cars pushed beyond the quarter-mile marker and kept accelerating toward the half-mile mark, the Jesko Absolut's 1,300-pound weight advantage stopped being a liability and became a weapon instead. Less mass to push through the air, less mass for the tires and suspension to manage at triple-digit speeds, and a body shaped specifically to slice through resistance rather than fight it head-on, the way a wider, heavier shape must. The Chiron Super Sport, still hauling its extra bulk and its less slippery shape, began losing ground for the first time in the entire test. Not because its engine grew weaker or its transmission hesitated, but because the math governing air resistance had finally started working against it in a way horsepower alone could not fix. Could 0.3 of a second at the quarter-mile mark really decide who wins a race that keeps going long after that marker passes underneath both cars. The Koenigsegg's factory driver, trailing at the quarter-mile line, began closing the gap meter by meter as the two-machine formation blurred past the 200-mile-per-hour range, territory where Koenigsegg's entire engineering philosophy was built specifically to dominate, and where Bugatti's early traction advantage had already been spent in full, with nothing left in reserve. This is the exact zone hypercar engineers spend a decade chasing, the invisible crossover point where a car stops being defined by how much power it makes, and starts being defined instead by how efficiently it moves through the air while carrying that power forward. Every design decision Koenigsegg made on the Absolut variant traces back to this single crossover point. The standard Jesko keeps a large active rear wing for downforce and cornering stability, useful on a circuit, but expensive in drag terms on a straight strip. The Absolut deletes that wing entirely, replacing it with small stabilizing fins that generate almost no downforce and, more importantly, almost no resistance either. That trade only makes sense for one kind of driving: a car pointed dead straight, chasing a number rather than a corner, willing to sacrifice cornering confidence entirely for a body that slips through air with almost nothing to hold it back. Bugatti made the opposite calculation with the Super Sport, keeping a longer tail and an active rear wing system that adjusts automatically to balance downforce against drag, depending on speed and load. That system makes the Chiron more stable and more forgiving across a wider range of conditions, which is exactly what a customer driving one on a public road wants. But forgiving and efficient are not the same design goal, and on a closed strip built purely to reward the second one, the Absolut's singular focus finally had a stage built entirely for it, where Koenigsegg took control. So, by the time both cars crossed the standing half-mile marker, the story the spec sheet told at the start of the day no longer matched a single number the stopwatch had actually recorded. The Jesko Absolut posted a half-mile time of 14.6 seconds, while the Chiron Super Sport crossed in 14.9 seconds, a full reversal of the exact same gap that had favored Bugatti at the quarter-mile mark just moments earlier in the very same test session. The car that lost the sprint won the marathon. Koenigsegg's lighter, more aerodynamic package needed distance to prove its case, and once it finally had that distance, the outcome inverted completely, run after run, with no ambiguity left to argue about in the comment section afterward. This was not a marginal, split-decision result decided by opinion or camera angle. It was the same underlying physics that had already let the Jesko Absolut set its own standing half-mile world record earlier in the year, clocking 223.6 miles per hour in 13.27 seconds, a mark that surpassed the previous record held by a Hennessy Venom F5 and instantly made Koenigsegg's own car the fastest accelerating gas-powered production machine ever timed over that exact distance. What does it say about a seven-figure hypercar when its best-case scenario only appears after the finish line most competitors never reach in everyday driving, or a casual comparison video? It says that raw horsepower numbers printed on a press release are not automatically the same thing as real-world dominance on real pavement, and that the Chiron Super Sport's early lead had been built almost entirely on an advantage that expired the moment the race grew longer than 440 yards. Bugatti's fans watching this unfold were forced to sit with an uncomfortable truth. Their car had not been beaten by more horsepower, more torque, or a better driver behind the wheel, but by a design philosophy that simply refused to compete on Bugatti's terms, and still won anyway once the terms of the race changed underneath both companies. Half-mile racing rewards a different kind of car than quarter-mile racing, and that distinction rarely gets explained before comparison videos go online. A quarter-mile is largely a launch contest, decided in the first 2 or 3 seconds by whichever car can convert power into grip the fastest. A half-mile is closer to a sustained argument between two machines about which one degrades the least under prolonged acceleration, whichever one keeps building speed instead of merely holding it. That distinction is exactly why the Hennessy Venom F5 comparison matters here. Hennessy's own machine had held the previous half-mile record specifically because it was built around the same lightweight, low-drag philosophy Koenigsegg leaned on to beat it. And now the Jesko Absolut sits above both of them in that specific category. 3 different hypercar manufacturers, 3 different half-mile attempts, and the pattern holding steady across all of them points toward the same conclusion. When the distance stretches long enough, weight and drag coefficient start deciding outcomes that horsepower figures alone cannot. On site, the reaction told its own story before a single official time was posted anywhere. Engineers who had spent the morning quietly confident in their own car's numbers were suddenly recalculating in real time, radios crackling with requests to confirm the half-mile split against the quarter-mile split one more time before anyone believed what the timing board displayed. That kind of reaction does not happen when a result matches expectations. It happens when a result contradicts everything a spec sheet spent years promising. And it happens specifically at the moment a room full of people who understand these machines better than anyone watching at home realize the story they came to film is not the story they are about to tell. The record still stands. None of this touches Bugatti's most sacred number, the 304.773 miles per hour two-way average, that still stands, untouched, as the only certified production car speed record on the entire planet. Koenigsegg has publicly discussed a theoretical top speed above 330 miles per hour for the Jesko Absolut, but as of this recording, that number remains unverified. No closed course, no two-way average, no Guinness certification, only a public claim from a company whose own founder has said an official record attempt could happen within the next year. Exact location still undecided. The same stretch of Nevada highway that hosted the Agera RS's 277-mile-per-hour run back in 2017 is reportedly not smooth enough to safely host the speeds the Jesko Absolut is theoretically capable of reaching, which means Koenigsegg may need an entirely new stretch of road before any attempt can even begin. Until that run happens, on a certified course, under two-way conditions, calling the Jesko Absolut faster than the Chiron Super Sport at outright top speed is not an established fact. It remains a prediction, however confident that prediction sounds, coming from the people who engineered the car. Does a half-mile drag strip really settle an argument that ultimately depends on a long, straight, closed road at speeds neither manufacturer has yet driven in front of an official timing gate? Not entirely, and it would be dishonest to pretend the argument is fully closed. What the drag races did prove is narrower in scope, and in some ways, far more interesting than a single top-speed number ever could be on its own. That outright horsepower and all-wheel drive traction win decisively when the distance is short, and that weight, drag coefficient, and aerodynamic discipline win just as decisively when the distance stretches out far enough for physics to finish making its case in full. Bugatti still owns the record book, printed and framed and unbeaten since 2019. Koenigsegg just proved, on a public strip, in front of factory witnesses from both companies, that the record book no longer tells the complete story about which of these two machines actually wins once the wheels start turning for real. Setting an official top speed record is not as simple as finding a long enough road. And that is precisely why so few manufacturers ever attempt one at all. A certified run requires a sealed, closed course, free of traffic, elevation changes, and crosswinds strong enough to affect a car moving at over 300 miles per hour, along with calibrated radar or laser timing equipment positioned at both ends of a measured mile for a true two-way average. Tires rated for those speeds are not off-the-shelf products. Bugatti worked directly with Michelin to develop rubber that could survive sustained rotation at over 304 miles per hour without the structural failure that would end far more than a record attempt. Koenigsegg now faces that exact same set of obstacles before the Jesko Absolut's theoretical number becomes a certified one, and every month that passes without an attempt leaves the 330 mile-per-hour figure exactly where it currently sits. Impressive on a spec sheet, unproven on a stopwatch, and entirely dependent on Koenigsegg finding a stretch of road smooth enough to let the car finally prove what its numbers have been claiming all along. History suggests that gap does eventually close. Bugatti itself spent years with an unofficial, widely believed top speed claim before Andy Wallace ever climbed into a Chiron Super Sport prototype and made the number real in front of certified timing equipment. Koenigsegg's own Agera RS followed the same pattern in 2017, a theoretical figure discussed for months before a closed Nevada highway finally turned prediction into a certified record. If that pattern holds one more time, the Jesko Absolut's claimed number will eventually face the same test every hypercar record has faced before. Not a wind tunnel, not a simulation, not a factory press release, but a stopwatch that does not care which badge is on the hood. So who actually won this rivalry? Bugatti struck first, its horsepower and all-wheel drive traction completely untouchable over the quarter mile. But the half-mile told a very different story, as Koenigsegg's lighter, more aerodynamic Jesko Absolut turned that early deficit into a decisive win once physics took full control. Bugatti still owns the only certified 300-mile-per-hour record on the planet, for now. Koenigsegg's 330-mile-per-hour claim remains just a claim, until a stopwatch on a certified course finally says otherwise. One brand proved it can win short, the other proved it can win long. Which philosophy do you trust more? Drop your prediction below, hit like, and subscribe for the next showdown.